Okay, so yesterday we started with this, so I'm going to go really, really quickly. But you do need to put those electronic devices away, please, because I'm the only one that needs one right now, and I got it right here. So the rest of you can put yours away. All right, we did talk about what the definition was. If you were not here yesterday, you need to get this down. I am recording this. I will put it on YouTube for you to go back, because we are going to go fast through this, because time is of the essence, guys. Tomorrow's the last day of this week. We got all next week. And then it's final exam week. Bam. Okay? Condition, life-threatening, not enough oxygen going to all of those organs. What were those three conditions necessary for oxygen to reach all the vital organs? What's the first one?
Pumping effectively.
A heart that is pumping effectively. Just having a heart won't do it. It's got to be pumping effectively. What's the second thing?
Blood volume sufficient to fill vessels.
Plenty of blood. And what's the third thing?
Blood vessels must be intact and functional.
In other words, they can't be cut and spurting. That is exactly right. Those are the three conditions that you got to have to keep a person from going into shock. Okay? We're not going to spend time right here because we did this. These are all the things that can cause shock. And by the way, that does not mean this is all of them. There may be other things. Any kind of traumatic injury can cause a person to go into shock. So this takes forever. Cute, but it still takes forever. Cute. Allergic reaction we're going to talk more about today than anything else because it's probably the most common thing. An extreme emotional reaction. All right, so this is where I think we started this, but we did not get finished with it. There are typically 4 kinds of shock. I think I told you this yesterday. I didn't know this myself until I started teaching this. I just thought shock was shock. Okay? You have hypovolemic shock. Hypo means what? Hypo. Anything hypo.
Over.
No. Under. Too little. Volemic. Volume. So not enough volume. So look at what the actual definition is. It is where the blood volume, remember one of those things, the 3 conditions to get blood, to get oxygen to all those vital organs is having enough blood. So if you go into hypovolemic shock, that means that your blood volume drops. Mainly that's going to happen from bleeding. So especially in arterial bleed, where it's spurting blood, we talked about that before, a severe burn, vomiting, diarrhea, dehydration, all will cause a drop in blood volume. So we are simply talking about not having enough blood because of one of these situations to supply all the organs with oxygen. That's the first kind. Yes?
Do you bleed when you get burned?
Not as much. There was a question, I think, on the test about that.
I put no.
That is correct. There's not as much. The only thing that would happen, though, is if you've got like a lot of third-degree burns, not necessarily second, but third-degree burns, it's going to burn away all the blood vessels. So, therefore, you're not going to have the volume of blood because there are no blood vessels. So, there's not necessarily going to be a lot of bleeding. It's going to burn it all away. So, that's correct. The answer was false on that. So, let's say, I'll give you an example. The guy that did I talk about this yesterday? The guy in the kayak that got his leg bit off by the shark.
Yes.
Without a doubt, in a matter of just a very few minutes, he was in hypovolemic shock. Why? He bled out. He's going to bleed out. So, among other things that were wrong, that is one of them.
Do you feel it coming?
I'm sorry?
You know you're going to go into shock.
You were going to look at the symptoms. You probably are not going to have your head enough. You're not going to be competent enough to understand what's happening. You're going to lose your mental capacity is what I'm saying. That is one of the signs. So when you say, do you know it? I doubt it, seriously.
Did they recover? You said they recovered his body?
Yes.
So the shark didn't get eaten?
Correct. Okay, so that's one kind. Then we've got cardiogenic. Cardio means what?
Heart.
Right. So you know this has something to do with the heart. All right, so anything that causes the heart function to be reduced to a point where it's not pumping sufficiently. So a minute ago, we were talking about the blood. Now we're talking about the heart that's pumping the blood. So there it says heart attack, ventricular fibrillation, inadequate circulation. So it's pumping. It's just not pumping hard enough to get that blood and the oxygen in the blood to the vital organs. So that's cardiogenic. So if you're doing CPR on them, their heart is not pumping, they're going to go into cardiogenic shock, obviously. Even if they're just having a heart attack, that means we're talking fibrillation, the heart is pumping, it's just not pumping sufficiently. So as a first aider, as you're dealing with these things, I would probably never expect you to call 911 and say, I think they're in cardiogenic shock, or I think they're in hypovolemic shock. Because what you do is you say, you know, I just got into this car accident, you know, you need to get here, blah, blah, blah. And they're saying, well, what are the injuries? Well, somebody's arm is almost cut off. In their head, they already know this person's going into hypovolemic shock. So for you, about the only real reason that you would really have to remember that or know that is if you're in the medical field and you're either the paramedic who, when they get there, knows what you're facing, or you're going to work in the ER and you know that once they get there, then you're going to have a blood supply ready. Because they're in hypovolemic shock, they've lost a good volume of blood, you better have some blood ready to hang. That's when you would have to know that. Okay? There is two other kinds of shock. One is neurogenic. Neuro means what?
Brain.
Well, yes, the nervous system. So it could be injury or damage to any of the nervous system. But I want you to look at what it says. That causes the blood vessels. Remember that all of your nervous system controls all that involuntary stuff. So it causes the blood vessels to dilate. So does dilate mean get bigger or smaller?
Bigger.
Okay? So think about this. You know, from a strictly a scientific, well, kind of common sense thing. If the blood vessel is full of blood, like the volume of the blood fills the vessel, but the vessel expands or gets bigger, what is going to happen to that volume of blood?
It gets a lot less.
Less.
Oh, what?
It gets less.
Is it the same amount?
It's the same amount of blood, but the space is bigger, so the volume of blood drops.
Oh.
Do you see what I'm saying?
Yes.
So what's happening here is, it isn't, yes, there is a problem with the nervous system. That's a given. But what that problem is doing is changing the function of the blood vessels and causing them to dilate. When they dilate, the blood volume drops. When the blood volume drops, there's not as much oxygen being pumped, getting to the vital organs. This is why this person goes into shock. Okay? A spinal cord injury, a head injury, a skull fracture, or remember we talked about an extreme emotional state. You know, if you're the person that's in the double kayak with somebody and you look back and you realize that your friend had his leg hanging over and you realize when you look back that he's laying back, you know, because his leg is missing, that could cause extreme emotional, an extreme emotional state. That could cause you to go into neurogenic shock. A car accident where you see somebody decapitated. A situation where you see a mass murder or even just a murder.
Wait, so even if like you see somebody like in the car accident decapitated, you still need to lay the person down with the feet elevated? Like even that?
Can you reattach someone's head?
No, not the dead person, the person who saw it and is going into shock.
Yes, they need to be laid down. Yes, they need to be
Not
treated.
the dead person.
That's what you...
That's not what I meant, sorry.
I think it's a little late. Yeah, no, the person who saw it,
That's what I meant.
the person who is now in an extreme emotional state, they will go into the same kind of neurogenic shock. They may not have not one injury, none. But the emotion of that will cause neurogenic shock. So the blood vessels will expand, the volume of the blood will go down. So not as much blood is going to be getting to the organs. And yes, the same exact thing will happen to them as if they had a serious injury.
Can you like treat yourself for shock?
Yes, absolutely. We're going to talk about that. Absolutely. All right, and then the one that we're going to talk about the most, because it's the one that you most likely are going to have to deal with, and that is anaphylactic shock. And that is the one that is an extreme allergic reaction. And we've talked a little bit about this before. Insect bites, mostly insect bites, foods, and medications are the three things that most people have to worry about for anaphylaxis. And we'll come back to that in just a minute, but there's some other general things that we need to talk about first. Okay? So those are your four kinds. Hypovolemic, cardiogenic, neurogenic, anaphylaxis. Anybody already know all those four before we started this? Anybody heard of anaphylactic shock? Okay, so that's what I figured. Because that is the most common. All right. Now, what do we do for first aid for shock? This is an incorrect picture. What is wrong with this picture?
Straight. I mean, he's like.
Okay, it's not a matter of not being straight. It is a matter of the feet being propped up too high. You want to prop them up only 8 to 12 inches, not like that. Why not like that? After all, the propping up of the feet is to do what?
Flow the blood.
Flow the blood back to the heart and the brain. That's exactly right. Okay? What is wrong with that position?
Too fast. Too much.
Too much, too fast. That's exactly right. You don't want to flood it, because especially like if a person's in, cardiogenic, their heart is already compromised. It's not going to be pumping like it's supposed to. If it's neurogenic, then you flood the brain too much and it can't hold the capacity of blood. So there's got to be it's kind of just an even flow back, not like that. Okay? All right, you're going to treat all cases of shock as severe. All cases of shock. It does not matter if they don't have just maybe little scratches on them. Car accident, they just got some little scratches on them. If you see the signs, which we're going to look at in a minute, you see the signs, you treat them all as severe, because people die from shock, not just from injury. Anybody with serious injury, you just assume that they are at risk. But I got to tell you, once you see the signs, you're going to say, my gosh, I would know something was wrong if I see those things in a person. So it's not like you're going to have to do a whole bunch of evaluation to try to decide if this person is in shock. The signs are obvious. Something's wrong with this person. And again, you treat it whether that's what's wrong with them or not, because it's not going to hurt them if you treat them and they don't need it. Bless you. All right, what are you going to see? Here are the things, again, severe injury or extreme emotional state. These are the things that you're going to see, and they're obvious that you're going to need to treat this person for shock. Now, sometimes, even though you recognize the signs, it's not always going to be easy to treat them, because they're not always going to be cooperative. They're not. They're not going to want to lay down. They're not going to want to prop their feet up. They're going to walk around. They want to walk around. They want to go see, is somebody else okay if it's a car accident? It's not going to be easy to treat them sometimes. So here's what you're going to see. Both of these, I'm going to put them, well, actually I'm going to put all three up because they kind of go together. Let's say it's a car accident. They're going to be restless. They're going to be anxious. They're going to be fearful to the point of shaking all over. Literally, you've heard of people talking about being so scared their teeth shatter. Their teeth chatter. What do you call it? No, their teeth chatter. Like cold, only it's from fear. That truly is a reaction of extreme fear. These are all things that cause people not to be cooperative. They're afraid to lay down. They're afraid if they lay down, they may not be able to get back up. or if they lay down, they're going to die. Or they're restless, so they're trying to walk around to see what's going on. Where is everybody? You know, where's my husband? Where's my mother? Where's my kid? They're not going to want to lay down. But the other signs that you're about to see tell you they're in shock and they need to lay down, because what's going to happen is if they don't, they're going to go unresponsive. So, but that's a problem for you. The other thing too is, you know, if they don't cooperate and they don't give you permission while they are competent, you can't force them. You can't force them. When they go unresponsive, what does it become? Implied consent. So you can treat them. But until then, if they don't want to cooperate, you can't make them.
Once they pass out, can you still put them in that position?
Absolutely. Well, yes. Or the recovery position. It depends. But we'll talk about that in a minute.
Standing up and then they start passing out.
They'll get lightheaded and they'll pass out.
Can you catch them, or
Sure, if you can. Because if you can't catch them, if you don't catch them and they hit their head, now you got a whole nother, issue to.
Not to help them. So I'll wait till they're fully gone to help them.
Well, if they're about to pass out, even though they may not be completely passed out, they are not competent. Remember we talked about competency? If they're not in a position where they can make a good judgment for themselves, then it becomes implied as well. Lauren.
This goes back to when you were talking about teeth chattering. I'm really afraid of vomiting. Like every time when I feel sick or it feels like I'm gonna throw up or my stomach hurts, like my teeth start to chatter, but I don't go into shock.
No, but that is a sign of fear. That is a sign of fear.
And I never knew why. I always thought I just got extremely cold.
Wait, so have you ever thrown up before? Were you like deathly afraid of it and you ran away?
I just started crying. Ran away from it. But like when other people
Okay. Listen, we can't get off track. We don't have that kind of luxury. Okay, obviously one of the things that's going to happen is your heart rate and your breathing rate is going to increase. That always happens when there is fear and anxiety, no matter what. So that's going to happen. Their mental state may start to deteriorate. The reason? They're not getting enough oxygen to the blood. So they may talk out of their head. You may ask them, was there anybody in the car with you? Or what happened? And they have no idea. They have no idea. They don't know where they are. They don't know who to call. Do you have a cell phone that I could find somebody's number? They don't know. Or they don't know where it is. So those are all things that are going to happen when the mental state deteriorates.
That really happens? Like they have
Yeah.
no clue?
No clue.
But they're fully functional?
Yes.
I thought that was only a movie.
No. They're going to be confused. They are going to be disoriented. Where am I? I don't know where I am. I don't know how I got here, believe it or not. Yes, those things do happen. They're not just in the movie. They are going to be sleepy. That also is what happens.
With a concussion.
Especially with a concussion. And that is why they tell you, because a lot of times with the sleepiness, people will go to sleep and they go to sleep and end up in a coma. And that's the reason they may let you go to sleep, but they'll tell you every 15 minutes that you need to wake them up just to make sure you can wake them up. So sleepiness, you don't really want them to go to sleep until, let paramedics get there and take care of that. But you really don't want them to go to sleep. Rapid, shallow breathing. Now, somebody pointed out up here, it says increased breathing and heart rate. And then when I said rapid, shallow breathing, that they thought that was contradictory. Not at all. The heart can beat fast, but weak. It can do both. And that's what happens. Breathing, instead of regular deep breaths, they're just going. And that's shallow. They're not getting enough oxygen, which is already the issue. Now you've multiplied the issue. Weak pulse. Just because the heart is beating, and it may be beating rapidly, it does not mean that you've got a nice, hard pulse. You can feel it. It's called thready. A thready pulse. Here's what's going to be the most obvious to you. Is they're going to be pale or ashen, and we've talked about that, kind of grayish. They're going to be pale. They are probably going to feel cool, but they are going to be sweating. So what's happening is they're not sweating because they're hot, and don't be confused with that. They're going to be sweating because that's the body's natural reaction. They're going to be colder on the inside. So your temperature, body temperature is what, 98.6, right? So their temperature begins to drop on the inside, yet they're sweating on the outside. So don't be fooled by thinking, well, but Miss Davis said you cover somebody up, but they're sweating. That's just going to make them hotter. That's the idea. Make them hotter because their body temperature is dropping even though they're sweating. It's kind of like an oxymoron, but that's just the way that the body reacts. Okay? They're going to be nauseous. They are going to be nauseous. And of course, at this point, you want to watch that. If you can get them down into the shock position, you want to watch that because if they start to vomit, you're going to need to grab them and roll them over. You don't want them to vomit while they're lying on their back. Now you've got another whole problem. They're going to be thirsty. That is the body's natural reaction, is to want something to drink. We already talked about why you can't give them anything to eat or drink.
Vomit.
They will vomit.
Can you move your?
Pretty much immediately.
Can you move your little?
Oh, sorry. Their lips, their fingernails, tips of their fingers will start turning blue. What's that called? Cyanosis. And that is an indication of what? Lack of circulation, lack of oxygen in those areas. So you see, you're going to see those things. You may not immediately get the breathing and the heart rate. You may not get the sleepiness or the restlessness, but you're going to look at them. You're going to see the color. You're going to see the blue around their mouth. You're going to see their sweating. Those are the obvious signs. That ain't right. You know, in your own, you don't have to be a doctor to figure out that ain't right. Something's wrong. Oh yeah, they're going to shock. I need to lay them down and prop their feet up so they can get some oxygen to their brain. Ultimately, if you don't do something for that person, that's what you were just saying. You mean they're just walking around and you're trying to get them to, are they going to pass out? Yes, they are. Yes, they are going to just pass out. They will ultimately become unresponsive. So, if you can't get them to cooperate, once they pass out, as long as they're still breathing. So you'd have to check that, remember. That goes back to your initial assessment. Check to make sure they're breathing. Put them in the shock position. Watch them. If they do start to vomit, because remember, if they go unresponsive, they can still vomit. You've got to watch them to make sure that you don't need to roll them over. And if you do, you just grab them and roll them over.
Do they ever come unresponsive while throwing up? Like, does that ever happen?
I mean, it's possible. It is possible. It's not probable, but it is possible. Most of the time, they're just going to stay unresponsive. That's why you have to be there. Somebody's got to be there. And if there are other people that need help, you just need to put them in the, you got to do something. You need to just put them in the recovery position and then go on. Don't leave them in the shock position. Put them in the recovery position.
Isn't it kind of like a relief if they start like throwing up because like they're breathing?
You would know that, but as long as you're there. But the problem is, what if you walk off and they start vomiting and they aspirate, and by the time you get back to them, now you realize they're not breathing because you didn't put them in the recovery position. So they aspirated. Now you got another problem.
Alright, okay.
Alright, when someone like comes out from underwater and then they're like laying on their back, do you do like compressions to make
Yes.
them spit up water?
Yes, you do.
So can you do that and make them spit up and vomit?
Or do the
You
Heimlich.
might hope. No, you can't do the Heimlich. Yes and no. You might can. You can try that. Obviously, you would try that. But there's no guarantee that's going to come. Depends on how far down in their lungs they aspirated.
So why does water like always come up?
Because most of the time, if they take in that much water, there's a lot of water. And if you get enough of that out of them, they will start breathing again. But not so much so with something as thick and...
Creamy.
Okay, you get it. You get it. You got it. You got it. Okay, you don't necessarily have to write this down because I know that you know this. Okay, without medical care, shock is they're gonna stop breathing and their heart is gonna stop beating. That's the bottom line to that. Okay, here's what you do need to know, and I do want you to write this down in capital letters, straight up caps. Once it develops, shock cannot be reversed without medical care. So in other words, if you don't do something to prevent it from getting really, really bad, and they go into full-blown shock, It cannot be reversed. Once those organs start shutting down without some serious intervention by professional medical people. You and I cannot reverse that. And that is the reason that you need to try to get them laying down and get those feet propped up so that that blood can get back to the brain so that you don't have that problem, or they don't have that problem. Because it cannot be reversed. We can't reverse it as first aiders. We don't have the equipment to do it. Just, that's huge. Okay? Now, let me just talk about this. The golden hour. It's not necessarily an hour as in 60 minutes. From the time the shark bites off your leg to the time that you get medical help, from the time of the car accident where your femur is broken and your femoral artery is spurting blood to the time you get medical attention, regardless if it's 15 minutes, 30 minutes, an hour, or 2 hours, is considered the golden hour. What that means is that the faster you get some help, the more opportunity you're going to have to live. The longer that it goes from the time you got injured until medical help arrives, the longer that it goes, the less chance you have of surviving shock.
So even if it's 4 hours, it's still called the golden hour?
Probably by 4 hours you're going to be dead.
Oh, that's great.
Probably.
Why would it take 4 hours?
Well, it depends. Well, no, I'm just saying, yes.
What if a shark bites off your foot, not your whole leg, just your foot?
You think you could live for 4 hours?
No, not without help. You're going to bleed to death. You're going to bleed to death. Now, last period, which is a kind of a good point. It's kind of like that. Somebody said, so if, and this is, I'm hoping that you would know better than this, but they said, so if your leg was dangling and the shark bit just off your foot or your leg at the knee or whatever, and you're there to do first aid for that person, do you first deal with the shock, like put them in the shock position, or do you deal with the injury? Of course, remember, your life-threatening injuries, BBC, bleeding, breathing, circulation, which is a heartbeat, okay? You got to deal with the bleeding first. You have to deal with the bleeding first. So if it's any kind of arterial bleed or any kind of large blood volume loss, you always deal with bleeding first. Then that is either bandaging, putting pressure, and I hate to say a tourniquet. The only way you're going to use a tourniquet is if somebody's limb is missing. If it's an ankle's gone because a shark bit at the ankle, then yeah, you can put a tourniquet on the rest of the leg to stop the bleeding. Typically, we don't use tourniquets anymore because if it's dangling by a small part, there's a possibility that it could be reattached. But if you completely shut the blood circulation off to the part that is attached, then you may cause them to lose the leg and not be able to reattach it. Does that make sense? So only if part of the limb is gone to stop the blood flow, you would use a tourniquet, which means a belt that is pulled as tight as you can get it, a rope that you twist around and around, put a stick in it and you know what I'm talking about? Twist it around and around and around and get it as tight as you can. But you really only are going to do that if part of that limb is already gone.
So should someone have done that for the shark victim?
But there was no one saw it until it was too late. Yes, they absolutely should have done that. And I'm sure that when they got them, that's exactly what they did. But by this time, he's already totally lost so much blood. Remember, you got 10 pints of blood. Do you remember when we did bleeding and remember how much volume that you can lose and you're going to go unconscious before you've lost it all anyway, and it doesn't take long. So, it's just too late for him. Chris?
I always said you lost his whole leg.
I don't know exactly where, but from the knee, at least from the knee down.
Because I was going to say, if it was his whole leg, where would you stop the bleeding?
Yeah. Well, if it was, it would have to be, if it was really up here at the hip, that's just going to be impossible to do. If there's a little bit of it left, and you could get, you know, a tourniquet around it like that, then yes, that would be what you would have to do. You have to do what you have to do.
I think we, talked about this, but if you're
cutting some food, right, you like cut your hand off, can't you like bring it to the
finger.
hospital and they'll reattach your hand?
It is possible.
And then it'll just work like your normal hand?
Well, not quite, it's not quite that easy. If the nerves grow back, yes, thank you. If the nerves grow back and that's it, that's all you got?
They said that you only asked for classifieds, so.
Oh, that's what they picked
Yeah.
them out. Okay, that's fine, that's fine. That's fine.
Yeah, no,
Lauren.
I went, they told me other places to go too, so I went there. That's why I took me so long.
Since you said shock can't be reversed without medical care, once you realize they're in a state of shock, do you just watch them and wait for medical care to arrive?
That's all you could, well, prop their feet up, cover them up. That's all you can do.
What do they do? What does medical care do to get them out of
Well, medication, they've got medication to start with. They've got better equipment as far as blankets go. Oxygen, that's the biggest thing they need. Because the whole thing about shock is a lack of oxygen. They've got pure oxygen. They're going to pump it right straight into their lungs. That's going to perfuse all their... So that's the biggest thing. So yeah, they've got better stuff. All right, we got to keep going. Here's what you're going to do first. You're going to check B, B, and C. You're going to check for bleeding, breathing, circulation first. And if any of those things need addressing, address that first. Then you're going to call 911. At this point, you know you need help. And then you're going to put them in shock position. Lie them on the back, 8 to 12 inches up. Anything that they may have that is causing oxygen for them to be taking in less oxygen. If it's a man and he's got a shirt and tie on, loosen that tie, pull that shirt open around the neck. You girls that wear the scarves around, that thing needs to come off. Anything away from the neck, anything away from the nose, anything that's stopping any bit of oxygen. This is about oxygen, really. Blaze it.
You said once it develops, it can't be reversed. How do you know when it's like
Past the point?
Before or past.
Probably unresponsiveness is going to be your main key. But I will say this. Keep in mind that you, even if a person stops breathing, you've still got like 4 minutes, typically, about 4 minutes of residual oxygen in the bloodstream. So it's not going to be an immediate, everything shutting down. Those things shut down slowly. So, it would be a few minutes before things start completely shutting down. Time is of the essence.
So just do what you can,
Do-
basically. Even if it does nothing, just follow your steps, even if it's too late.
Absolutely. That's all you can do. But remember, too, most of the time, you've got EMS that should be there at least, right, 8 to 10, hopefully. That's what you can hope for. All right. Try to maintain their normal body temperature. Keep them warm. I don't care if they're sweating profusely. You cover them up as much as you can. Don't let the sweating fool you. That's the thing that you've got to remember. All right, so here are the things that you need to know. Now, you already know the no food or drink. Let's talk about the smoking. Let's suppose this is not a medical, like a physical injury, but let's say it's an emotional state. Why do some people, when they're all upset and nervous, smoke? It calms them down. So, let's say this person has witnessed, some horrendous something, and it's more of an emotional issue, and they are not completely competent, but they're competent enough, and maybe you get them to lay down. They lay down for you. You prop their feet up, you put something over them, and they say, they're shaking. The whole fear thing, they're shaking. I need a cigarette. I need a cigarette. I need a cigarette. Okay, what is this all about? Oxygen. So what are you doing if you let them smoke a cigarette?
Taking away oxygen.
Bam.
Way to go, birthday
Do you
boy.
want to die?
So what you're doing is, if you allow them to smoke, every puff of that they take, instead of breathing in good oxygen, they're breathing in smoke. It's already the oxygen issue is already a problem. So now if you let them smoke, so it's not about that's just ridiculous, or it's not going to make them vomit or anything like that. It's the fact that they already need more oxygen, not for you to take it away from them. So you don't let them smoke. You know, my cigarettes are in the car. Could you just go get me a cigarette? I'll lay right here. Just go get me a cigarette. And they can be pretty convincing, you know. And you think, okay, what's it going to hurt? Let them smoke a cigarette if they'll just lay here. You know, let them do it. No, you just have to kind of talk them out of it. Paramedics will be here in a minute. As soon as the paramedics just say to them, as soon as, whatever. Paramedics will be here in a minute. You can ask them if it's okay.
Alright, but what if they're like, if you don't go get it, I'm gonna go get it?
That's a problem.
Can I just like knock them out?
You cannot knock them out.
Like you're not gonna go get
You
it?
cannot knock them out.
Could you give it to
How
them?
about
Or
I
like
smoke
not
it
like
and then I blow it in their face?
That's not what they want.
Is that good enough?
So since, like, when you go into shock, like, you kind of, like, lose your mental state, could you just be like, yeah, I'm gonna go get you it, hold on, I'll go get it, and then, like, you can go and, like, check the scene, just, like, keep an eye on them, and they think you're gonna go get it, so they'll calm down and kind of lay there? Since they're not
Yes.
thinking,
Yes.
Like you can have one in 5 minutes and then,
you know?
No,
Yes.
You come back and be like, there's not any in the car, I'm gonna go to the store.
no, I'll take them to my phone.
You do what you have to do. Okay, again, sweating is not a sign of overheating. Don't be fooled by that. You got to offer them reassurance and comfort them. The thing that you want them to do is to stay lying down. If you can get them that way to start with. You know, this is even if they are responsive. Even if they're responsive. Okay? And if they start to vomit, or even you watch and you see that they may start to vomit because you kind of see that heaving coming on, then just put them on their side. Forget propping their feet up. Now, if they vomit and they're done and they're still breathing and you know they're still breathing, then roll them back over.
What if they start going up again?
Well, that's why you've got to stay there and watch them. I'm telling you, that's why you got to stay there and watch them. Okay?
If they're already vomiting, can you give them water?
No.
If they're already doing it, like, because
They'll make it.
I know why. I know what you're thinking. No. Yes, I know.
Dehydrate them?
No.
Slow them faster?
No. Not, they probably do need hydrating, but it's going to need to be intravenous, not through the stomach. Because the stomach, the body's automatic reflex is to get everything out, get it out, get it out. So they need hydration, but they'll put that in through an IV.
Dehydration.
That is the least of their concerns at this point. Okay? And so if you need to, if they do go unresponsive, but they are breathing, so you have checked to be sure they're breathing. All of a sudden they're talking, all of a sudden they're not. And you kind of look at them, you realize they're out of it, you check to make sure they're breathing, and you put them in the recovery position. Because remember, they can still vomit even though they are unresponsive. So then you would forget about worrying about their feet being propped up. I would suggest that you keep them covered, but roll them over, because propping their feet up is not nearly as important as not letting them choke on their own vomit. So that's what you would do. Okay? I don't think I'm even going to start this. I don't want to start it and then we can't finish it. This is probably